Good morning, Lockwood. Hope you are all doing well in the middle of this seclusion we're enduring, and hope your family is thriving in the process in spite of it. Want to look at some things for today's Sunday school lesson with you in an adult perspective that goes along with the kids' lesson. So we are looking at Luke chapter 5, talking through the beginning of when Jesus calls his disciples. Luke chapter 5. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little far from the land. And he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. So my family recently watched the series called The Chosen. I would encourage you to do the same if you have the opportunity and can do so inexpensively. We get to watch it for the month in free because of the pandemic, and a lot of different places are allowing things to go on for less expensive or for free. So we got to watch it for free, but even still, I think it could be inexpensive or at a discounted rate. It's well worth the watch. Through that series, we watched this particular episode, and a couple of things come to mind that I want to highlight that are not just from the book's lesson, but from a human perspective of watching that and interacting. So, first of all, we often see Peter as an explosive, get-it-done kind of guy, and I just have to marvel at the fact that that kind of person in the middle of this story says, "Well, whatever you want, I'll do it." Yet he does. Peter has been out apparently the whole day before or night fishing and has not caught anything. And Jesus comes, asks, first of all, doesn't really ask. He just takes his boat and pushes it out a little bit, asks him to push it out a little bit. And after he gets done teaching, he asks him to take the boat out and to drop the nets. I see a couple of things with this. Either Peter, who we know in this story as Simon, and his brother Andrew, had been watching, had heard of. We know that Andrew introduced Peter to him, and so they had been exposed to him, to Jesus, to some time. So it's implied that they had been watching and listening, and perhaps even though they'd been fishing, they were there listening to Jesus teach when he gets up into the boat. And I just want to stop and consider, as Jesus calls his disciples, think about who some of these people are. They're not the learned, the educated. They're not the most influential, although it seems that Simon may have had some influence there. They're typical people. And I think sometimes in our society, we believe that influencers, people that are of influence for Jesus, have to be of some magnitude, whether something like me with a title of pastor, or Shane, who's been in the community for a long time preaching and teaching, or something of that effect. And yet, God calls these men because he sees inside of them something that he can use. And I want us to stop and think about ourselves. Peter, when he recognizes what happened, falls flat on his knees and before the Lord and says, "Get away from me because I'm a sinner." You know, that was natural and that was positive. That was good. when we stand before the Lord, should recognize our sinfulness. And it's not because we are good people that God can use us. It's because of what he can do through us in spite of us. The kids' message, I think, is going to talk a little bit about brokenness. And in some respects, in this day and age, brokenness is flaunted a little bit, that people are saying, I am who I am, and so, get over it. But it's from an arrogant side of view of, I'm not going to change for you. I can be who I am because it's just the way it is. But in this story, I want us to see the brokenness of Peter, seeing his sinfulness and saying, I'm not worthy, and in fact, get away from me. Jesus doesn't want to get away from us. In fact, he invites Peter, don't worry about that. Stand up. In fact, I've got a job for you. The point, I think, is for Peter to not so much look at himself, but to look at Jesus. In our sinfulness, the Pharisees and all those others, as we look at in a minute later from now, they had their eyes on themselves. Peter had his eyes on himself. And we ought to recognize our sinfulness, but we ought to not stay there. As Jesus called his disciples, he called them to something, not just away from something. And so I want us to recognize, as we go through the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at some things that Jesus does that are out of the norm. One of the phrases that I heard at least a couple times in the series, The Chosen, was get used to different. Jesus does not do the normal. He does the supernatural. And he calls us to trust him. And he did that of Peter in this lesson. Trust me, put the nets down. He did, and they had more fish than they could hold. It started to sink the boats. Not sure how they got it into the shore, but it's believed they got all the fish in. Some of them maybe jumped out of the boat so that their body weight wasn't in the boat and swam the shore with the boats, but either way. The other thing I want us to see out of this is the next section is in verse 27. After this, after the fishing experience, and then after Jesus cleanses a leper and a paralytic, it says, after this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. And Levi made him a great feast in his house. And there was a large company of tax collectors and the others reclining at the table with them. And the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus answered them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Continues to go on, and the Pharisees continue to ask Jesus questions. But the point of this lesson that I want to make is, first of all, Jesus asked Levi to follow him, Matthew, a tax collector, someone that was he was a Jew, but he was using a position of power that the Romans had given him to not only tax them, but tax them above and beyond to make himself rich. So he was hated. Currently, I would liken him in our state maybe to the Governor Whitmer, who's supposedly one of us, but has made a lot of people angry. I'm not going to get into that discussion for this lesson, but the idea is someone that a lot of people are angry with. And I could see Jesus calling someone, whether it was Governor Whitmer, a President Trump, a Joe Biden, anyone else in government that you believe is doing things wrongly for our nation. Imagine somebody like that, and then you sitting around the table with that person, and Jesus inviting them into the same group and saying, I want you to join us. You'd probably do like many others probably did at that table. What are you thinking? Why would you ask Matthew to come with us? Don't you know what he's done? I love what Jesus did in The Chosen. He looked at Peter and said, you didn't understand when I asked you either. But I did. I want to turn the table and say, look at yourself. We are no better than Gretchen Whitmer. We are no better than Donald Trump. We are no better than anyone in the political scheme that you look at and frown upon. Better yet, we are no better than anyone you know personally in our community that has done a lot of horrible things. Perhaps if Jesus was here today, he would go to them and ask them to follow him as well. And as you accompany other people like that in the following of Jesus, sometimes those that are used to a specific way of life, that feel like they have to only do good things, that they only can be good if they're following exact rules, like the Pharisees, it'll make them uncomfortable. And Jesus said, I'm not here. God's kingdom is not here, is not for just those that are good, but it's there for those that are sick. Think of COVID-19 right now. The hospitals are not there for people like me that don't have any symptoms. It's the doctors and the nurses and the care is there for those that need the help. And that's what Jesus came for. For those of you like me and you and the worst people you can think of that were desperately dying in sin. And Jesus calls us. One last thing I want to mention through this is, sometimes we look at our kids and we see them as just disobedient or rebellious or just such a great kid because they're doing so well. Part of family ministry's focus is to get you to realize that the first place your children should be made disciples is in your home. Jesus didn't look at Peter because he was so good. He didn't look at Levi because he was so good. He looked at them because of what he could make them into. And as we look at our children, sometimes they're rascals. Sometimes they're downright mean. But we need to call the disciple out of them. We need to lead them to saving grace. We need to lead them to the Jesus that drew us out of our sin and out of our horrible behaviors, into the light, into grace, into humility, into following him because he is the only good and righteous one. Hope that encourages you. Hope that helps you. And I hope you have a great week. Lord bless you. And until we see you again, which I hope is very soon, we'll be praying for you. Good day.